But now I'm really excited to introduce Rock Paper Reality. They are an 8Wall premier partner and award-winning immersive studio. They worked at brands such as Sony, Netflix, Hilton, and Microsoft, and to harness the full value of AR for marketing, advertising, and entertainment. We're joined today by Patrick Johnson, the CEO and founder of Rock Paper Reality, who has over 10 years of experience in advertising, research, advising, presenting in immersive technologies. He also co-organizes AWE Night in San Francisco, one of the biggest AR communities in the world. Alongside him is Preston Platt, CTO and founder at Rock Paper Reality, who has over 14 years of experience in the AR and VR space and an impressive 20 plus years in the 3D space. So really excited to hand it off to them to talk more about Rock Paper Reality and how they've been using 8Wall for adventure games. And I'm going to stop my screen share now and hand it over to Pat.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks,
yeah, thanks, Chanel. And let's go ahead and get the screen share going here. All right. Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for coming out, and thanks 8Wall for having us. This is our second 8 Talk, and I'm incredibly excited for this topic. It's something that we're really passionate about and had a ton of fun developing this experience we're going to be talking about today. And we do believe it's like a really fantastic use case and one that we're starting to see more traction from the industry. So today we'll be talking about WebAR adventure games and how to drive engagement and meaningful results. The quick background of RPR, as Chanel mentioned, we've been in the space for over 10 years. RPR has been around for over 5. We are proud partners, premier partners of 8Wall, been kind of there since day one, developing some amazing experiences for a number of different brands. Did some great 360 AR portal work for Glenlivet. We've done some really cool work with Jackson Family Wines, who did the world's first holographic WebAR experience and did one of the world's largest deployments of WebAR with Saatchi Art, which we talked about last time. All right, so getting into it. So this, the event that we focused on for this experience was the Intel Innovation event. It happens every year in San Jose, and it's Intel's big opportunity to bring in experts, developers, business people, basically anybody who's really interested in seeing what's the latest and greatest from Intel and Microsoft and getting their hands on the new products that they'll be pushing out. And for this year, Intel and Microsoft, they wanted to do something different, something that their audiences hadn't ever seen before. And coming off of the back of COVID, they wanted to give people a reason to actually get back in person into an event space and see something pretty cool. So the key objectives that they came to us with was they wanted to, once again, encourage people to go from attending online events back to in-person. So they wanted to kind of give a hook. And this is something that they started announcing leading up to the actual event itself, which is always important. They wanted to drive people to booths throughout the event space. And this is one of the key features that made this experience different that we're going to really get into the meat of later. But I think this is one of the coolest objectives and one of the real things that I think sets WebAR apart and 8Wall unlocks. They wanted to engage and educate their audiences about Intel and Microsoft software tools that are coming out. They wanted to increase the memory retention of core product messaging of each zone, which is obviously important because every time you go to event space, if you're anything like me, you see it all, you forget it all, and then you go to the bar. So with WebAR, like at least this allowed people to have a better 70% retention. And it was something that they thought was going to be a really great way of being able to improve that throughout the event. They also wanted to get people's hands-on, something that was a little less of a passive experience. And they wanted to make something that was shareable. And finally, they just wanted to have give something to their audiences that they had never seen or experienced from Intel and Microsoft. This introduces Token Wrangler 5000. So this was the experience that we came up with to help Microsoft and Intel meet these objectives for the event. The background is our friendly blue blockhead there, Chuck, is walking his way over to the Microsoft swag booth. Along his way, a wormhole opens up and sucks all of Chuck's awesome badges out of his backpack into the wormhole and spreads them around the event space, as happens at these types of events. So the mission was that we, the user, the audience, they had to go and help Chuck go find his badges that were spread across the event. And if you found them all and you solved the puzzles on each one of the event spaces, Microsoft is giving away a Surface at the end. So there were some stakes involved and some incentives. So what was pretty cool about this was this is kind of one of its first of its kind, at least that we had seen from a WebAR puzzle game that was multi-level, and it encouraged people just to be able to actually visit different spots around the event space. So I think one of the key pieces to this, and what was what made it different from at least Intel and Microsoft's standpoint, is when somebody goes in to these shows, they're often someone who's kind of an enthusiast for one specific part of the event. That could be their cloud or Azure, that could be something around security. And they wanted to give people a reason to actually travel to different places in the event versus see one thing and then go to the bar. So this is where that incentive mechanism came in. They had a map, they had an objective, they needed to go help Chuck get these tokens, and then there's stakes, which was they had an opportunity to win a prize at the end of it. So this is something that we kind of created. We created this map feature that was kind of inside of it and showcased these different booth spaces and these different icons that were representative of the product. The other part of it that actually, just one last thing on this one, the other part that was kind of cool about this was that it was a, given that it was a multi-level experience, we had an introductory part to the show where everybody actually saw it as they were walking in the door. And when they came in, they played the introductory experience and they were introduced to what it was that they needed to do. And then it sent them to level 1. However, if you went straight to level 2, we had basically it was kind of doing a bit of tracking and data to where we'd know that you played the introductory experience, you went to 2, and then it would actually redirect you to go to 1. So this was a sequential game, and it was something that we were using a little bit of data tracking in order to know where you went to, but it wasn't something that required a login mechanism. So it allowed us to create a multi-level game without logins, which was something that was kind of an objective to keep it low friction. The second piece to this was, this is actually Chuck there. You could make Chuck bigger at the end of it. So we kind of blew Chuck up to be big. But if you look there right in the back corner, you can see there's a very blurry box, which we'll show later. But those actually were physical boxes that were set up on the table, and we had the physical props. So for us, we really wanted to turn this into a mixed reality experience. We wanted it to be something that the users could fuse the digital and physical world with. And the cool thing is we used 8Wall's joystick feature, which we absolutely love and we're using you can use for all kinds of things, including portals, but it's obviously great for characters. And this allowed us to control Chuck, walk him around the table, and then your objective was to find the token. So we could actually hide the virtual token inside the physical box. And as people are exploring, that's where they would have to go and they would find it. So it was something that we were trying to bring in the physical props of the space and bring in the character play into it as well. One of the other things that's super cool about creating the WebAR experiences and these games for events is that it creates this bridge between the physical space and the digital space. So often at the events, for Microsoft and Intel, it's super important that they keep a conversation going with these the people that are visiting the different booths. So if you were, once again, coming in there from the security side and then you're visiting the cloud booth, they wanted to be able to update them with information that's happening with Azure. So there would be opportunities at the end of completing each level to have these CTAs where you could sign up for the newsletter, learn more, and then keep that conversation going. So that was an additional touch point that kind of kept the conversation going from just the physical to the digital space, and obviously a good way of being able to use lead generation if you're using it for different events. So this is it all put together. I'm going to probably just kind of play through it and then pause it at certain points that I want to make call outs from. But yeah, this is a Token Wrangler 5000 in action. Right, so there's your launch pad, there's your worm portal, there's Chuck, and there's your swag booth. The other thing that was cool is people were really blowing up Chuck big and kind of taking pictures with him and putting around the event space too. So there was kind of cool opportunities for that shareability. These are some of the games that we created. We move this up here. So this was like Ghost Chuck. So basically it's like the portal, Chuck blows up into a bunch of pieces, and then you're actually trying to tap the pieces of Chuck to kind of put him back together. And then when you're token, so in this instance, it wasn't just the physical boxes. We're kind of playing with the actual table itself. All right, Chuck got his token. He's super stoked. We're also kind of doing a little bit of that throwback type of video gameplay with the kind of aesthetic for this. But you can kind of see here, in this instance, we've got the physical box. Chuck is actually walking around. We had virtual assets there. And so when you got to the actual physical box, the virtual doors would open up. But this would require some exploration from the actual user. Those are your CTAs. And here were the some of the images that we'll just talk about more right now. So kind of the takeaways for this were, this thing was successful. So from everybody's perspective, it outdid what our expectations were for it. So 30% of all the attendees completed the experience. There were 6 times more attendees visited stands with the AR experience compared to those without, which is a huge metric. That's something that they had never seen before. And then thousands of attendees actually clicked the CTAs that completed the experience. And that's an image from it. Obviously, you can see all these people crowded around. So that was super awesome. People loved it. So kind of just the takeaways of this, the do's, one of the things that's super important is these games don't stand alone. It requires a integrated marketing campaign to be able to make them successful. So before the people got there, they were already promoting the game and its presence. So people already had an idea that it was going to exist before they actually got to the event. When you arrived at the event, there's physical signage instructing people what to do and where to go and how to use it. Things to keep in mind, connectivity. Obviously, it's an event. Not all events have good connectivity. This one did, but before you go off and then build the greatest experience ever, just make sure you're going to actually have some good Wi-Fi to be able to play it with if it's at a space like this, because that'll be really sad. One of the things that I would also recommend is this game in particular, given that there were so many different zones, required a lot of setup. It's a lot easier if you're on site and you're kind of doing that hand holding, you're setting things up as you kind of you're there doing that white glove treatment for the client. They like it. It's a heck of a lot easier than being, trying to do it remotely. And we always highly recommend trying to be there and offering that on-ground support. if you're doing mixed reality, be aware of lighting and shadows. So just make sure that you understand the dynamics of the booth, where the light is. Shadows can ruin your entire target. So it's going to be one of those things, again, where everything's working perfect, but lighting is coming down, your target's ruined, and everyone's like, it doesn't work. And you're like, it was working just a minute ago. And then it's because there's this horrible shadow coming down and your markers just turned into a big shadow. So something to keep in mind, and something that just often goes unnoticed. Keep the story simple. For us, the objective was super clear for this one. What you needed to do was super clear, but we have like, and clients will do this as well, is try to convolute your story and make the game mechanics far more complicated than they need to be. And we always recommend keeping it incredibly simple, because people just want to get in, play the game, and then try to get their prize. Which is the final one. Put some stakes in there. If you can give away anything, whether it's just some sort of notoriety, a leaderboard, or a physical prize in the best case scenario, highly recommend that you try to give something away. Some of the don'ts, we don't like for events, especially like this, like to make the games over a minute to 2 minutes long. Like, you kind of want to keep them short and snappy, and it's not only just for the user's like attention span, but also because there's traffic, right? You saw that big crowd of people around it. You kind of want to just create some throughput. So you want to get people just moving through that thing and get the conversation going, get the experience, and then moving along. We also recommend trying to keep the game simple and not very big. So like trying to keep it under 15 megs. This is another reason why the character is a nice opportunity for this, because it doesn't require as many 3D assets. And you can kind of use a lot more of that character versus creating a whole crazy 3D environment. So this one is an interesting one. Don't allow the people to approach it from all different angles if that's not part of the game. Let me see here. Yeah, so this is a great example of like, we didn't expect like everybody just to like hit the space from all different sides. And you can see, dude over here is smiling and having a good time, but he's never going to find that token in the front of that box right there. And this was something that was kind of like unexpected. Like, he sees Chuck, he's running Chuck around the table, but only way you could actually go inside of it was from the front of the box. So what we will, in hindsight, would definitely do is make sure that we're directing people to play the game from the space where they need to play it from, and make sure that we're kind of guiding people better, so they can't just hit it from all angles. Events are loud. Make sure that whatever is critical to the gameplay isn't reliant on the audio. This had a lot of really fun audio and music in there, kind of, once again, that throwback to old school video games, but don't make it critical to the story or the gameplay. And finally, it's just like, keep the game simple, don't get too clever, and people will have more fun. All right, that's it for me. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Preston.
Hey guys. Yeah, so if you want to go to the next slide, Pat, we can kind of introduce what it is. So we kind of got introduced to Lightshift in the VPS, and kind of how to use the environment and do all these kinds of fun mixed reality things. We wanted to do a first R&D project. So it was Halloween time, and we decided to make a game called Pumpkin Run. It's a little out there. But as you can see, like, the idea for this project really was to kind of get our hands dirty with VPS and understand how it works and everything else without having it be a client project. Also very important to do your R&D before a client project. And as you can see, the cat is probably something that normally clients wouldn't want. We got a little crazy with it. But yeah, so VPS was exciting for me. I come from a long background of doing like immersive headsets, and kind of how do we use the environment around us to make a mixed reality type experience. And now with VPS coming out, that means we can. So that means our adventure style games, our things like this, get a little bit more interactive with the environment, can be a little bit more interesting. So yeah, that's kind of the idea, what we ended up doing. But yeah, let's go to the next slide, Pat. Yeah, so we have a little video here. So obviously we kind of added like a little context menu at the front. This is really good to kind of bring everybody together to a centralized location as the game started. I do think that's really important for VPS. So then the cat, you can pause right here, Pat. But so then what the pumpkin, crazy pumpkin cat would do is that it would run off in a direction, and then it was kind of everybody's job to go look around. Obviously, you can see down here in our bottom left, we used VPS around this fountain that kind of made it fun. You know, really kind of leaning into how do we hide the cat. You know, in San Diego, I went and found a spot that was kind of conducive for this little cat to hide behind these little pillars, right? So you want to only be able to see some certain people that are walking in different directions and how they're going to find this cat. But yeah, so you can keep going, Pat. But, you know, key things we wanted to figure out was like, how do we use a database to call out simple web calls for the multiplayer element of this? The VPS side with multiplayer becomes really, really interesting for this idea of a scavenger hunt based game. We did end up splitting the two different like VPS locations that we shot because we didn't want to get into multiple chunk loading. I'm sure you can do that today. We didn't want to get into that. But yeah, it ultimately was just a really fun way to do a scavenger hunt style game. But, you know, things that we learned from this, you know, it's kind of make sure your content looks like it can fit in any time of day. You don't know whether it's going to be cloudy out. You don't know whether it's going to be sunny out. You know, one thing you'll notice about a lot of the content we do is we kind of pre-bake in a lot of shadows, especially when you're using VPS, and this idea of kind of using this mixed reality component to it is really good to have shadows that are kind of baked in at the floor level so that everything's kind of context aware. And when you're doing clipping behind other elements with the occlusion layer, it doesn't look crazy. It adds that sense of depth. And then, yeah. Do
you want to talk about the one multiplayer use of it, of just being able to the first to find it, Preston?
Yeah, so essentially we kind of just use Firebase to kind of trigger off these basic web calls, which was start game and then when cat was found. And what we did was we actually used the VPS scene here on the left. We kind of found trigger points that we saw that would be randomized. We kind of random picked their location. And once one person found it, it would be a web call. One person found it, they get the point, and then random spawn in the next location. So it's really about simplicity, right? Really leaning into VPS, using it in the most simple way possible for multiplayer. And I think it worked out really nicely. Yeah, pretty much it. But yeah, I mean, obviously we're looking at this now for a lot of stadiums and a lot of event-based things. And I think that that's going to be really, really fun to bring people together to kind of, I mean, obviously Pokemon Go was the very start of kind of all of this, right? But yeah, just opening it up, broadening it up to other clients, and yeah, it's fun.
Awesome.
But yeah, that was.
And Preston, really appreciate you talking about those two case studies. And we have lots of questions in Slido. I think we have about, yeah, so I'll just kind of go and pick the most upvoted questions first. And I'll drop the link in the chat again if you haven't had a chance to submit your question. A question from here was the map done with respect to the actual site, or was it just a visual reference for the token wrangler experience?
Yeah, good question. It was a representation. We went back and forth on whether we include the actual maps or the representation piece of it. And I guess they ultimately wanted to keep it kind of with this token wrangler aesthetic, game aesthetic, because they thought that there was enough maps around the space that essentially people could go and easily find the zone. So it was something that we called out exactly where the zone was within inside of the virtual map that we created, but it was something that they would, if they couldn't find it, they would need to go look at an actual event map. But that's not necessarily the way you'd always want to do it. There's plenty of good reasons to actually put in a better representation of that map inside of the game.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. The next question is, was a token wrangler experience a progressive web app, or was it just like a one-off game?
I mean, it was a one-off game. I mean, it was, if I'm understanding the question right, I think it was just for the event itself. And it just had a purpose, just to move people around the space. So if we pulled it outside of the event itself, it would have lost the context, and it would have kind of need to be kind of reworked in order for it just to be a standalone game.
Cool, thank you. And I guess if you had to redo the entire or parts of the token wrangler experience with 8th Wall product updates, how would you change the experience or improve the experience?
Well, I mean, obviously, we did that before VPS was a thing and before kind of the idea of using VPS. I know that going back to that idea, I know that we would have loved to have more of a scavenger hunt that was a bit more broader and interesting in that space, right? As Pat alluded to, we were very subject to a small confined area with everybody crowding around, which made it quite difficult. So space management was something that we weren't prepared for. That was quite interesting. Yeah, but I mean, I think the interesting thing about it, and I think the thing to remember is like that idea was very much defined and created with the limitations of what is the best case scenario in mind. And I think that that's like the ultimate takeaway is just always to keep that in mind, right? Don't even, everybody wants more features, everybody wants more things, but you can actually get quite creative with the things you have around you, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Add anything onto that, Pat?
No, I think given the features that exist today, I don't think we would have changed much. I just think there's a lot of cool opportunities with new features from 8th Wall to do this at like bigger scales. Like we could have created a game similar to that with like, the sky effects and do it for the stadium and use something that is a, controllable blimp. I know you guys have used the UFO, which is super cool, but I haven't seen much controllable assets yet for the sky effects, which hopefully that will come out with the demos. But I'd love to kind of see some of that and some occlusion with that. And so anyways, I think there's some really cool things that you could do for out of door or out of home as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. I think you may have touched on this during your presentation, but it would be great if you can clarify, like, what methods did you use to distribute the experience, the token wrangler experience?
It was all QR code based. So at each one of the stations, we had a QR code. One of the things I actually didn't call out there is that we did have the physical instructions that were what would you call it? Just pasted down on the table as well. But ultimately, it was telling people to scan the QR code to play. If they went to the wrong level, then there would be instructions that pops up and tell them to go to the correct level. But we worked with the marketing team to make sure that it was introduced through the marketing collateral in the emails prior to the event. And that was super important. So people knew what to look out for when they got there. And then once they got to the event, they knew to look out for, the blue face square guy. They knew to look out for the QR codes and what to do when they saw them and scan them. So that way we did see a whole lot more activations because people already kind of had that in mind of what was happening before they got there. And I think that's a really big takeaway that I'd recommend.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I really like that call out on the marketing part. That's, I think a lot of people forget that. And the next question is, let me see. Oh, how did the extra traffic at the stands or the booth impact people's enjoyment of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously
ahead,
it's more fun when there are more people doing it, right? I mean, obviously, the more traffic you have, the more people come, right? Because like, what are you doing? What is going on here? So I mean, ultimately, that was great. We also did have like a dedicated Wi-Fi network for it, so that was also great. You got to be very careful about that. And obviously, like when you're doing these event-based things, it's like, how do we make it as small as humanly possible? I know we did a lot with text to make sure it was almost a nothing. All of our PNGs, everything that we had were tiny. So that was a big help. But yeah, I think obviously you want more people there. You want to build some hype. It's always good.
And one thing that was also pretty cool that came out of that as well is booth people, like one of their main goals is to get people talking to you. And you're just trying to like make it like less awkward and just bring people in just to have a conversation. And so It was great. This worked really well. just for the booth people there to come in there and have an organic conversation about what was happening, about the product, and people actually talking about it. So it infused the fun, like the game mechanics, the conversation was organic as well. And then obviously the people around it were talking. So it created just a great conversation all around.
Yeah, and kind of going into the booth and how you helped navigate and recognize like each booth. Someone asked, did you use VPS or image targets to recognize each of these booths?
Yeah, so we basically just understood which one you were at, and based on like, Pat, did we end up using cookies to understand where they had been? Was that what we ended up doing? Yeah. So essentially, like if we had known that you had gone to another web page previously, then we could progress you further down the line.
Cool, awesome. And I guess a broader question is like, can you talk a little bit more about the tech stack behind that entire experience?
Yeah, so it's React 3 Fiber, and we actually, because it was with Microsoft and Intel, we used Azure as the backend for it. But if you want to go into far more depth, I'll get you integrated with our database guy.
Awesome, thank you, Preston. And kind of moving into, I guess the next experience is, well, both experiences, but can you talk about like the development process of how you built the Intel and the Halloween experience kind of like end to end?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think every development studio constantly goes through a growth and always is constantly evolving in the development process itself, right? You know, obviously we start with a great illustration team that starts mocking up these ideas. We start with a great UI team that starts coming up with UI ideas. I think we spend a lot of time in user experience inside of the UI. You know, that's one of the, you know, just because we're in WebAR doesn't mean that we've got all these things solved, right? User experience is constantly something that evolves throughout this process. And, you know, QAing is also huge. For getting early QA is what we've realized is really, really important and really powerful. So getting this in people's hands quickly to understand what they understand and what they don't. I'm sure that everybody in this room has come across this issue of like, nobody even understands that they're looking at their phone screen and what is happening in front of them. And even conceptualizing the idea to someone else is very difficult, right? So a lot of the development work was a lot on that UX side of things and the UI integration. But then from there, obviously, we get into testing against QR codes, testing against image targets, making sure that they are big enough. What distances are we recognizing from? Where are we falling off? Are we going to use image targets just to trigger a 6-off experience, right? Because usually just the localization component of that is enough. And usually it is maybe even a better experience. And then obviously for the token wrangler side of things, we were playing with some physics components in there. It's kind of like this idea of where do we push the tech to it working and it being new and innovative? And then when do we kind of hold back and then stop? But from a dev point of view, I'd say that was most of it. And then obviously the 3D side takes on everything the 3D side needs to take on. Anything you want to?
One other thing we did, we added to that as well, is that was our one of our first times using Bloom effects for that experience.
It was.
So that added, like, given we were kind of doing that throwback, you know, game future sci-fi kind of look, we wanted to make sure we brought in the neon lights to it, and it looked really great. I think it was our first time kind of playing with it and our opportunity to use it. And so I would definitely recommend looking at different effects that you can bring into the experiences. You know, to help tell that story and make it just look a little bit more magical.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for giving that answer. And just for reference, everybody, Pat dropped his email into the chat if you'd like to stay connected. And they are also both on LinkedIn. Highly recommend to follow them and keep updated with Rock Paper Reality. But the next question I have is, in general, how would you guys define success and metrics for WebAR adventure games?
Well, it's a good question. And at the end of the day, it comes back to the objectives, right? And so what we do is we don't ever create our creative and our ideas in a bubble. We really start with a problem statement. We really try to get to the heart of who it is that we're creating for. Where is it going to be deployed? Why are we developing it? And then we can start to actually look into the what behind it. So until we really understand who's using this and what it is that the brand wants to achieve by deploying it, sometimes we'll tell them, AR is not the best fit for this. Use a video. It's much better. What you want to do, you're putting a square peg in a round hole. It's just not a good fit. So we really go through a kind of a comprehensive process just to understand ultimately, what it is. And then we kind of start to go and look into the success metrics of it. And I think the benchmarks now, which is great, is that we're starting to kind of, by deploying these experiences, we're starting to see actual benchmarks that we're able to use for future experiences. The challenge is that not every event is the same, not every experience and audience is the same. So it's sometimes still a little bit challenging. Like, for example, if we were to deploy this at a whiskey conference, we might get better results. We might not get very good at results, but I think it's the fact that we also had developers and gamers that are going to this thing and they really like to use it, and it was exciting for them. So a lot of this is still very much being figured out as we go. But at the end of the day, it really starts to with understanding your audience, trying to get that persona data from them. And then things that we would work on is, like, for some projects, it could be dwell time. But in most instances, I think for like events, it's going to be something around, call to action. How many people are actually clicking the link to go sign up for the newsletter, to go buy a product, to go, get tickets, to, go do something. And so that's going to be kind of like the main piece of it. And then all the other ones are kind of like the nice to haves. Return can be one as well. That's often underlooked. For an event, it doesn't really make much sense. But if it's a game that you're putting out there, I would definitely look how many people are coming back and playing this thing again.
Yeah, and some of these things, like, are success metrics that we weren't expecting, like talking to the person that's working at the booth because you're working through something. Like, be open to the other success metrics that you weren't prepared for.
Yeah, that was part of the success metrics, was start a conversation. And it was just like with the people working at the booth, and we're like, okay, cool, we could do that. And then let's just create something cool that's, conversation worthy. And it worked out.
I love that. I love to hear that. And I'm really curious about, like, how are you guys able to incentivize players to finish the game? I know you talked a little bit about it generally, but yeah, like, where have you seen the most success for that?
So I think I think brands will often get caught up where it's like, well, we can't give away a vacation to the Bahamas. And we're like, you don't have to do that. Like, I think, the Surface isn't that expensive. It's something that obviously helps Microsoft promote the Surface while they're at the event. So it is actually just advertising as you're going through it. And it's a good enough prize for people to actually go through and continue to play through, because they want for a chance to be able to win that. Now, I think the thing where it gets interesting is it's more challenging if it's somebody who, let's say it's a leaderboard and they got the highest prize, number, and then they're having to go in there and then that leads to a giveaway. Like, the person with the highest score wins, because they really have to get into the security piece of it. You have to make sure people can't cheat it. They can't use bots. And then they're just like, wait a minute, how did you have 100 times more than everybody else? But in this instance, it was a sweepstakes. So it's like, you finished it. You're one of the elite people who did, you're in with this very small group. And then at the end of it, everybody walks away with a badge. Some people walk away with a Surface. So I think that was kind of the idea, is like trying to give something to everybody, but ultimately, there's something of real substance that's keeping people going through to the end.
Awesome. Thank you for talking more about that. And I guess kind of moving into the technical aspect again, what was the most challenging aspect technically for both games when developing?
Yeah,
well, I can. You go. You start, Preston.
Yeah, I mean, as far as technically goes, I mean, I would say just making sure the Azure instance, like, we had all of that set up appropriately, and then tested all the Wi-Fi, and then understood maybe where we could have pitfalls inside of an event-based experience. Like, there are certain things that you can do, like you can load test against what you've got, but then it's only a test, right? You don't know what's actually going to happen at the event. There's so many so many things that can happen that you'd never even imagine, right? And so I think, back to technically what we did there was just make everything as small as humanly possible so we could have it be as efficient as possible. It just always will save you at the end of the day. Yeah, I think that's kind of my main takeaway there, Pat.
Yeah, I mean, I think technically, like, certain challenges were keeping it incredibly lightweight. So coming up with a compelling story with like very minimal assets was part of the challenge. So, what Preston does really well is optimization. So even the assets we used, I know somebody was talking about how do you create a 15 megabyte experience, and it's not easy, and we've got some special sauce around creating really good looking assets that are incredibly optimized. But I think it can all be done. I think it's just sometimes you have to work within the limitations that you have, and that's part of the the fun and the strengths of it, but also part of the challenges is there's always going to be these limitations that you have to create something cool within. I think other challenges were just also like the other thing I just add about with events is most of the time you don't get a marketing manager a year in advance talking about the event. It's usually like, wait a minute, we don't have something cool to show for this event yet.
Yeah.
We need something fast. We've got 30 days. What can we do? And they're like, augmented reality. Great. And then we've got 30 days. We're off to the races. Everybody's testing. You've got multiple stakeholders. Like, you've got too many ideas. You're trying to down select the ideas and just get to something that works and is good and makes everybody happy. And that is always a significant challenge, and the stakes are high because you're like, you can't be like, oh, sorry, it's taken a little longer than expected. And you're like, well, thanks. The show was last week. So it is something that everybody's heart rate is definitely moving astronomically higher than usual around.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess the next question is, can you kind of describe your VPS workflow? Like, did you start with private scans first, and then how did you know the experiences you were able to move it into a public environment?
Yeah, we started with private scans. And I think at the very end, we made it public. Obviously this was an R&D project, right? So a lot of what we were doing was not made to be public and not made to scale to a lot of people and everything else like that. I will say on the VPS scanning side of things, obviously we had we wanted to spend a lot of time getting the best workflow out of that. So, how do you scan these chunks the best way possible? A lot of what we were figuring out was like, how do we optimize the chunk for the space that we're at? So it's like really about scanning the environments. I think location-based scouting and understanding what you've got to work with is really, really important. But yeah, I mean, it was just a learning endeavor.
Yeah, I like that that phrase, a learning endeavor, for sure. We're learning here as well. I think someone asked about if you're able to use private scans in a published experience, and I'll kind of answer to that. Technically, you're allowed to, when you're choosing your project use case, like if it's a demo, if it's a commercial project, we don't allow you to use private scans in commercial projects because it's for general use. So just think about your use case, and if you're building something for R&D, that's probably totally fine to use private scans in a published experience. If you have more questions about that, feel free to hit us up.
Yeah, and we were doing it as one of the first experiences to try using it, right? So we had a lot of weird situations we were working through just to make sure we got everything right. So yeah, I think we were in a private, and I don't think we were able to publish yet, or that kind of idea. So
that's very true. I think you guys are in the beta. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so kind of moving into a broader question is, what is your vision or like goal for VPS for web and multiplayer coming up?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, obviously I personally love the idea. We talked a little bit about stakes, right? And I really do want to get into reward-based activations, right? The idea of scavenger hunts, the idea of large scale deployments in a scavenger hunt capacity for cash prize or something that is a bit larger. I'd love to see that same kind of enthusiasm again that Pokemon Go had with the idea of getting people outdoors, right? I think that that's my broader hope in all of this. Obviously, you know, headsets are coming, things are coming. The whole landscape of this is going to rapidly change and be very interesting. So hopefully we get our feet down and figure it all out before that happens. I don't know about Pat, you want to allude to on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the multiplayer piece of it, like that is something I'm kind of the most excited about as well. Like, I feel like event spaces, like, you know, sports games, location-based entertainment, things that are bringing people together and able to collaborate in real time is definitely part of the fun. I think like what we did for a Padres experience, which Sarah was talking about in the chat. You know, one of the things is it was a multiplayer experience. We did have monitors around, so everybody was able to kind of play together, because often, you know, if you've got one person playing in front of you, you're like trying to look over the shoulder and see what they're up to. But if everybody's able to see simultaneously what the other person's looking at, and play together in one space collaboratively, that can be really fun. And I think it's a good way of just like, you know, yeah, just creating that connectiveness and bringing someone around, you know, whether it's a brand or a sports team or whatever it is, but also just like making sure that the gameplay is kind of front and center. It's got to be a cool game. It's got to be fun, and there's got to be some competition. And I think even leaderboards, like having something where there's like, you know, some a little bit of notoriety around it, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a really cool experience. I'm a Padres fan over here, so I was really happy to go live. And maybe we have a few more minutes left, so 2 questions and then we can wrap it up. The next question is, it doesn't have to be 8 related, or even, I guess, but can you think of like an AR experience that you guys developed that surprisingly flopped or succeeded really well? And like, what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the location-based Padres experience, we did a lot for teaching us the simplicity of use, right? What we did was we really leaned into simplistic game mechanics that enabled people to have a great experience together. And when you do that, magic happens, right? It's not really about all these crazy interactions that you need to do and all this game lore and everything else. It's like lean into a family having fun together, make the interactions, move your head, tap the button, and boom, they have the greatest time of their lives, right? That's where immersive really sings. You know, I think that was one insane takeaway that I've been constantly trying to get back in all these other projects. It's kind of simple, creative, good use case. But at least that's for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Padres experience was just awesome. I mean, it was just so many learnings. And I think what's so cool about like that project was being able to be down there at the booth and seeing people play it and watching like families kind of get that competitive edge. And like Preston alluded to, the game mechanic is super simple. It's like hit the ball through the ring and see who gets the highest score. Like, I think like when you think about like game mechanics, it's like, it's not necessarily something has to be convoluted to get people excited. It's like, it's just, here's a very simple objective. It's like creating a really cool world, you know, and the Padres experience was part of that as well. It's like the wall opens up and you're standing at home plate and we've, you know, captured the whole stadium, and you're able to see a representation of the stadium itself. So the visuals are very impactful that are around it, but the gameplay itself is very super simple and still competitive and fun, and people kept coming back.
Awesome, thank you. And I guess the last question to wrap it up is, what's in store for Rock Paper Reality for, I guess, this year or next year? And how can we stay connected with you guys?
Well, I mean, you tell us, Chanel. I mean, whatever's coming out from 8Wall, I mean, we're going to be at the forefront of that. So I think that's kind of where our heads are at. But I think, no, I mean, we're really excited about, you know, what you guys are doing in 8Wall and web and just everything you've been pushing out. I'm really looking forward to getting the team's hands dirty around the sky effects, like that. Some of the things I saw that have been coming out are so cool. And then on the side, we're also really looking forward to doing more headset stuff. We also, we do our WebAR is our bread and butter, but we also come from a long history of head-worn and are excited for some of the cool announcements that might be coming out in June. So looking forward to all of that.
17th year Apple's releasing a headset. Let's go.
Snapdragon Spaces, someone put in the chat. For sure, really excited to see what's in store for the rest of the year. I know that we on our side have lots of exciting things coming up. So that brings me back to my announcements. Do not miss our session next week. We have a really talented studio, Flamingo Filter, presenting a Beyond Reality session. And if you haven't attended a Beyond Reality session, they are sessions focused more on business acumen and advancement and different use cases for WebAR. And then, of course, our Q2 Developer All Hands, where we're going to be announcing really cool product updates as well as community initiatives. So do not miss that. And just really big thank you to Pat and Preston today from Rock Paper Reality. Please stay connected with them on their social media channels. I will share that in the chat as well. But thank you. And I'll be here for a few minutes to say bye to everyone.